The afternoon sun hung low over the small town street, and the air felt slow and heavy as people moved quietly through their routines. An elderly man named Samuel walked along the sidewalk with careful steps, and his hands held a small grocery bag that showed signs of long use. His back was slightly bent from years of work, and his face carried calm lines shaped by patience rather than anger. Samuel had lived in this town for decades, and he knew every crack in the road and every familiar shop window. He believed in kindness and quiet strength, and he believed that respect could calm even difficult moments. Samuel paused near a bus stop bench to rest his legs, and he took a slow breath as cars passed by without notice. At that moment, a police vehicle rolled up and stopped close to him, and the sudden sound broke the peaceful rhythm of the street. An officer named Miller stepped out, and his movements were quick and tense, as if he had already made a decision. His eyes fixed on Samuel, and the look carried suspicion instead of understanding. People nearby sensed the shift in the air, and a few slowed their steps while others watched from a distance pretending not to notice. The officer asked Samuel where he was going and why he was standing there, and his voice was louder than needed. Samuel answered softly and explained that he had just bought food and was resting before walking home. He spoke clearly and politely, and he showed no sign of resistance or fear. Instead of listening, the officer stepped closer, and his tone grew sharp and impatient. Samuel kept his head slightly lowered, not in shame, but in an effort to stay calm. He had learned long ago that silence sometimes protected dignity better than argument. The grocery bag shifted in Samuel's hand, and one apple pressed against the thin paper. The officer continued speaking with harsh words that made nearby listeners uncomfortable. A woman across the street stopped walking, and a man near a shop doorway raised his phone quietly. Without warning, the officer lifted his hand and struck Samuel across the face. The sound cut through the street, and time seemed to freeze for a moment. The grocery bag slipped from Samuel's fingers, and apples rolled across the ground. Samuel staggered but stayed on his feet, and his eyes filled with shock rather than anger. He did not shout, and he did not respond with force. Instead, he looked down at the scattered food, as if trying to understand how a simple walk home had turned into this moment. A low murmur spread among the small crowd, and a few people gasped in disbelief. Someone whispered that this was wrong, and another person pressed record on a phone with shaking hands. The officer looked around briefly, as if testing the silence of the witnesses. Samuel slowly bent down and began picking up the apples one by one. His hands trembled from age and pain, but his movements were steady. Each apple he lifted seemed to carry years of restraint and quiet endurance. What the officer did not realize was that cameras nearby had already captured everything. A shop security camera faced the street, and a passing car dash camera had a clear view. Even a traffic light camera stood silently recording the moment. Miles away in a tall federal building, a man named David sat at his desk reviewing case files. David was focused and calm, and his mind worked with precision shaped by years of training. A sudden alert appeared on his screen linked to a community monitoring system he helped develop. The image froze David's breath as he recognized the elderly man in the footage. That man was his father Samuel. David's chest tightened and his hands paused over the keyboard. David did not panic, and he did not rush. He stood up slowly and walked to a secure room where his team worked on sensitive cases. His expression was controlled, but his eyes carried a quiet fire. He replayed the footage carefully and confirmed the location and time. Every detail mattered, and every frame told the same story. This was not a misunderstanding, and it was not isolated. David contacted his supervisor and shared the evidence calmly and clearly. The response was immediate and serious. A decision was made without hesitation. Back on the street, Samuel had finished gathering his groceries. He stood upright again and faced the officer with dignity. He spoke only one sentence, asking if he was free to go. The officer waved him off dismissively and stepped back toward his vehicle. Samuel walked away slowly, carrying more weight in his heart than in his bag. The crowd watched him leave with silence and regret. What no one on that street fully understood was that the moment was already moving beyond them. Files were opening and calls were being made. Truth had begun its quiet march forward. And this was only the beginning. The night settled over the town quietly, and the street returned to its usual calm, but the feeling of unease remained in the air. Samuel reached his small home and placed the groceries on the table with slow, careful movements. He washed his face and looked at his reflection, noticing the faint mark left behind, and he took a long breath to steady himself. Samuel sat down near the window and watched the lights outside flicker on one by one. He had lived long enough to know that moments like this did not always end fairly. Still, he trusted that truth had a way of finding light even when hidden. Far away, David moved with purpose through the federal building halls, and his steps were calm but firm. His team gathered in a secure room where screens displayed footage from different angles. No one spoke loudly because everyone understood the weight of what they were seeing. David explained the situation with clarity and restraint. He described the moment on the street and identified his father without emotion clouding his voice. His team listened closely and reviewed timestamps and camera sources. Every piece of footage told the same story from different views. The officer's actions appeared clear and unprovoked. The team began organizing files and creating a complete record. Boxes were prepared to hold printed reports, digital copies, and device logs. Each box was labeled and sealed with care. Nothing would be missed and nothing would be rushed. Back in town, Officer Miller returned to his routine, believing the moment had passed unnoticed. He parked his vehicle near the station and joked with a colleague about paperwork. His confidence came from years of never being questioned. What Miller did not know was that a formal review had already begun. Reports were moving through channels he had never faced before. His name appeared on screens far beyond the town limits. The next morning, Samuel woke early and made tea as sunlight entered the room. He felt tired but steady, and he chose not to speak about the incident to neighbors. He believed silence could be strength when paired with patience. A knock came at his door later that day, and Samuel opened it to see David standing there. For a moment neither spoke, and then they embraced quietly. No words were needed to explain the shared understanding. David checked on Samuel gently and asked if he felt well. Samuel smiled faintly and said he was fine and proud of his son. The simple words carried more weight than a long conversation. David left soon after and returned to his work with renewed focus. His team finalized preparations and coordinated with oversight officials. Everything was scheduled carefully and legally. Vehicles prepared to travel toward the town as files were secured inside evidence boxes. Each box represented truth and accountability. Nothing about the approach would be loud or chaotic. In town, rumors began to circulate quietly. Some people mentioned seeing phones raised on the street the day before. Others whispered that something bigger might follow. Officer Miller noticed unfamiliar cars passing more often. He felt a slight tension but dismissed it as coincidence. His confidence still shielded him from doubt. That afternoon, federal vehicles arrived and parked near the local station. People paused and watched from a distance, sensing importance in the moment. David stepped out wearing a calm expression that revealed nothing. His team followed carrying sealed boxes and documents. Their presence changed the tone of the building instantly. Conversations stopped and attention shifted. David requested a private meeting with station leadership. The request was formal and direct. There was no room for refusal. Inside the room, files were placed on the table carefully. Screens displayed still images and timelines. Each detail was explained without raised voices. Miller was asked to enter the room. He walked in expecting routine discussion. Instead, he saw unfamiliar faces and sealed boxes. The confidence in his posture slowly faded. David identified himself calmly and stated the purpose of the visit. The room felt heavy with quiet certainty. Evidence was presented step by step. Footage played from multiple angles. The timeline left no gaps. Miller attempted to speak, but words failed to form. He realized the moment on the street had not vanished. It had multiplied into undeniable truth. Outside, Samuel sat at home, unaware of the exact moment unfolding. He sipped his tea and watched the afternoon light shift. His heart felt calm as if he sensed balance returning. Back at the station, the meeting concluded with clear instructions. Procedures were explained and next steps were outlined. No arguments were accepted. Boxes were signed and logged officially. Every action followed protocol. Accountability moved forward quietly but firmly. David left the building with his team and the town watched in silence. No sirens sounded and no voices were raised. Justice did not need noise to be powerful. As the vehicles departed, Miller remained behind, facing a reality he had never faced before. The weight of consequences settled in slowly. The street where everything began seemed very far away. And the story was still unfolding. Morning arrived with a strange stillness over the town, and people sensed that something important was happening, even if they could not explain it. Shops opened slowly, and conversations stayed quiet, as if the streets themselves were listening. The local station felt different as well, and officers moved with caution and avoided eye contact. Officer Miller sat alone in a small room with his hands resting on the table and his thoughts racing faster than his breath. He replayed the moment again and again, wondering how a single action had grown so large. For the first time in his career, he felt unsure of what came next. Inside another building, David and his team reviewed the next phase of the process with calm focus. They checked documents, verified statements, and ensured every rule was followed carefully. Nothing would be rushed and nothing would be ignored. Samuel spent his morning tending to small tasks at home, and he kept his routine unchanged. He watered the plants by the window and cleaned the table slowly. His calm was not weakness but quiet strength shaped by years of life experience. A community meeting was scheduled that afternoon, and word spread gently through the town. People who had witnessed the street incident felt a pull to attend. They wanted understanding and reassurance. David arrived at the community hall early and stood near the back, observing quietly. He did not seek attention, and he did not speak until invited. His presence alone brought a sense of seriousness to the room. Neighbors filled the seats and some held phones while others clasped their hands nervously. A local leader opened the meeting with measured words about trust and responsibility. The air felt heavy but hopeful. One by one, witnesses shared what they had seen that day. Their voices shook at first but grew stronger as they spoke. Each account matched the evidence already collected. David spoke briefly, explaining that the process was ongoing and handled with care. He reassured the community that fairness guided every step. His words were simple but firm. Samuel arrived quietly and took a seat near the back, unnoticed at first. When people recognized him, the room grew silent. Respect filled the space without being spoken. Samuel stood slowly and thanked everyone for their concern. He said dignity mattered and truth mattered even more. He did not speak with anger and he did not assign blame. The meeting ended with a shared sense of resolve. People left the hall feeling lighter yet aware of responsibility. Change had begun within them as well. Back at the station, administrative actions continued steadily. Reports were reviewed and oversight officials maintained contact. Everything moved forward without interruption. Officer Miller was placed on leave pending review, and the news traveled quickly. Some reacted with surprise while others nodded quietly. Accountability was no longer a distant idea. David returned to his team and prepared for the next steps with quiet determination. He reminded everyone that fairness protected everyone involved. Professionalism guided their actions. Samuel spent the evening with a book near the window. The street outside looked peaceful again. He felt no triumph, only balance returning. Across town, conversations changed tone and people spoke more openly. Neighbors greeted each other with warmth and reflection. The moment had touched more lives than expected. Documents continued moving through official channels without delay. Every signature carried weight and purpose. Truth remained steady. As night fell, David called Samuel to check in. They spoke briefly and shared calm words. Pride passed silently between them. The town slept knowing the story was not over. The next chapter waited quietly ahead. The final days of review unfolded with quiet focus and careful steps as every detail received attention. Officials moved through procedures with patience, knowing the importance of doing everything the right way. Nothing was rushed and nothing was overlooked. Officer Miller remained away from duty as decisions formed through clear process. Time moved slowly for him and reflection replaced certainty. He faced the weight of actions that could not be undone. David continued working alongside his team, ensuring transparency at every stage. He reviewed documents late into the night and confirmed each record with steady focus. Justice demanded precision and respect. Samuel carried on with daily life, choosing calm over resentment. He greeted neighbors kindly and shared quiet conversations. His strength came from peace, not from conflict. The town observed the process with growing trust. People spoke openly about responsibility and fairness. Awareness spread gently but firmly. One afternoon, an official statement was prepared and shared through proper channels. The findings were presented clearly without harsh language. Truth stood on its own. Accountability measures were announced and steps for improvement were outlined. Training review and oversight changes were included. The goal was growth, not division. David attended a final meeting where documents were signed and sealed. The evidence boxes that once arrived now rested as part of official record. Their purpose had been fulfilled. Samuel received a visit from community leaders who thanked him for his dignity. He responded with humility and hope. He believed the moment could help others. A public gathering was held to share closure and commitment. People stood together, listening carefully. Unity replaced fear. David spoke briefly, reminding everyone that fairness belongs to all. His words were steady and sincere. The crowd listened with respect. Samuel stood beside his son and felt quiet pride. No celebration was needed. Balance had been restored. The town slowly returned to routine, but with changed hearts. Conversations carried more care and awareness. Lessons remained. David prepared to leave, returning to his work beyond the town. Before leaving, he walked the street where it began. The space felt lighter. Samuel watched the sunset from his window, feeling peace. Life continued with renewed trust. Hope remained strong. The story closed not with noise but with understanding. Truth had spoken softly yet firmly, and dignity had prevailed.